say aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you. So next item, item 21, Our Space, Future Development Strategy for Greater Christchurch. So realising, sorry, were there any comments that staff wanted to make as we move into this item?
No, I think you've got the report, and we've had several briefings around this, previously. So I think most people should be aware of this item. So no, nothing further to add to our report.
Thank you very much. So we'll move into questions and take the report obviously as read. So we've got a number of recommendations in front of us around adopting the recommendations report and adopting the final version of Our Space. If we weren't to take those recommendations and the result of this decision, the result of this process was a decision not to adopt, what would the implications of that decision be? What would likely flow from that?
Sure. So we're legally required to produce a future development strategy under the National Policy Statement for Urban Development Capacity. So if we don't adopt this today, we will have to create one, either just one for Christchurch City by ourselves, or we'll have to go back to the partnership and ask for to develop another one that covers all of Greater Christchurch. And the other councils would be in the same position as well. They could either create their own one, or would be back to the drawing board working together. I suppose the key thing with this one, and the reason why we work together, is because we are recognising that we've got an urban development strategy, and in the longer term, we are trying to encourage as much growth, 70% of growth within Christchurch City, to support the climate change is one of the reasons that we discussed before about having people working and living close to where they work. If it was a separate development strategies and Selwyn and Waimak did their own one, then that working together and having more growth within Christchurch City would not be an option.
So the disadvantages of that to Christchurch presumably would be that we would lose influence over what, for example, Selwyn and Waimakariri we were doing, because we had essentially excluded ourselves from the work of the partnership that had been done by not adopting this today. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And the other councils would have the option either to come up with their own individual strategy, or to continue to work together without us and without our influence to produce a joint strategy through whatever mechanism.
Yes. Yes.
And it's been said by some that if we failed to adopt this today, that would then see the breakdown of the Greater Christchurch Partnership and other streams of work going through that partnership in a way that may not be beneficial to Christchurch.
That's right. I would send a signal around that, but that is a separate conversation that we need to have in terms of how the partnership functions. But so this is about this future development strategy. But yes, it would give some signals around that. Yes.
So it's likely that not adopting this would lead to the need for that conversation.
It would certainly accelerate the need for that conversation. Yes.
Thank you. Questions, Pauline.
Yeah, thank you. I know this has been a piece of work in progress in a long time, and I know it's been back and forth to the hearings panel a few times, because I think we in Christchurch City Council have wanted a little bit more, and this represents a bit of a compromise in our situation. Correct. It's not exactly what we would want, but it's more than we originally had. Can you please give us a sort of a summary of the movement and the changes that we have made towards what Christchurch wants from
Sure.
the original recommendation?
Yep, sure. So, yeah, there are a number of issues that were raised previously, and we submitted on the document to get those things addressed, and so we've made our position quite clear with the rest of the partners, and there has been some compromises. So the document now does acknowledge that we need to address downstream effects, in particular downstream transport effects, and work together on that. The document also has got these new future development areas, which is around Kaipoi, Rangiora and Rolleston, are going to have a minimum density of at least 12 houses per hectare. So that's higher than what the current greenfield minimum density is in Selwyn and Waimak, which is currently 10. So we've seen some movement there. And we've also got a list of actions to work together on, and one I know has been interesting to some councillors is around an action plan around social and affordable housing. So we have got some commitment to work together on that, and we'll be working together to see where that lands over the next coming months.
So those are changes that have been made in our favour after all the toing and froing and negotiating.
That's
so we have made up some ground.
Yes, yep.
And isn't there something in here that says actually the time frame for this has been reduced to 10 years and then we have another look at it?
So we have to actually look under the legislation, look at this every, well, potentially every 3 years. If we have to do a capacity assessment every 3 years, and if that identifies that there is a shortfall, then we have to come up with a strategy to address that. So potentially we will have to do that this again shortly. This has almost taken 3 years to write, so we're actually going to have to start looking at this shortly anyway. Go through this again. Yeah. But the way it is structured at the moment is in 10 years' time, I think is what you're referring to.
Yes, yeah.
So for the first 10 years, growth will be apportioned as per what the population projections are saying. And then in 10 years' time, we will work towards having the approach that we had in the urban development strategy, which is 70% of growth will be within Christchurch City. So over the longer term, 10 years plus, we'll work to get more of that growth within Christchurch City, recognising that the majority of the people within Greater Christchurch actually work in Christchurch City, and so having people live and work close together is a whole lot of advantages. Would
you call that another gain from the negotiations?
Yeah, that was in the original proposal, but yes, that has remained. And I suppose the other thing that has remained, I mean, whilst we have seen obviously gains in our favour, there were other people who were wanting other things, and so there were people wanting more land outside the urban boundary. The hearings panel that worked on that have not granted that, so we are keeping within the boundaries.
In other districts.
And what about the protection of fertile soils?
Yeah, so by keeping within the boundaries, we are not going beyond the urban development strategy. So we're not going beyond where the urban development strategy set the boundary, sort of 10 plus years ago when it was signed up to. So yeah, we're not impacting on fertile soils beyond there, and so that keeps a sort of line in the sand around that.
Right, thank you.
All right, thank you. So remaining questions, I've got Phil, Sarah, Yanni and Vicky.
Thank
Phil.
you, David, and for all your huge work on this. My question's around in section 4.2. One of the requirements, as you know, of the future development strategy was to identify the broad location, timing and sequencing of the future development capacity in new urban environments and intensification opportunities in existing ones. So my question is, with what we have in front of us today, how far do you think we have got to achieving that, particularly around the sequencing part?
Yeah. So yeah, that was a point that we have raised a number of times, and so I suppose the document at the moment, and this is around this 10-year sort of period I was talking to before, says that we will only release, so that there's going to be a change to the regional policy statement that comes out of this. It will only release land for the next 10 years. So we're not releasing land for the whole 30 years. So that provides a little bit of sequencing that we're only going to be looking for the next 10 years. And as I said, we're going to have to redo this, and so that will give us opportunity to look at what happens beyond those 10 years in the future. In terms of intensification and densities, and so there is an action that Selwyn and Waimak in particular will look more closely at their densities and whether they can raise them even higher. So we've obviously there's now agreement to go for at least 12 houses per hectare. In the city, we're required to do 15 houses per hectare. Selwyn and Waimak will look at whether they can raise that even further, whether it's up to 15 or similar. So there's an action, a piece of work to do that. So we will have to continue through the future processes, through the future reviews of this, and through the regional policy statement and their district plan reviews to ensure that we continue to see more sequencing and more densities.
Thanks, David.
Yep.
Thank you. Sarah.
Hi, actually, I just want to make a quick clarification. There was Pauline's mentioned negotiations. There were no negotiations between partners. There was some concern expressed that some of what the hearings panel had brought back to the Greater Christchurch Partnership wasn't quite clear enough, and so the partnership sent the document back to the hearings panel for clarification in a set of specified areas. The hearings panel then considered those and came back with new recommendations.
Yep.
But there were no sort of negotiations as it being characterised. The process was clean. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. Yeah. It's just a choice of words. I just need to be really clear because I know that there's gazillions of developers and their lawyers out there. So yeah.
And Sarah, just for clarification, of course, you were a member of that hearings panel.
That's right.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yanni.
Some general process questions. Initially, when council was given the option around establishing the process, I think we made a request that we would like to see young people and children actually involved and engaged. I can't see through any of the report where young people and children's views have been taken into account, or in fact, even better, I think we asked advisory group or around the governance table. So can you just help me understand if that was acted on, if not, why not, or if so, how that was done?
Yep. So there was engagement with youth. There was, from what I understand, a workshop held with them, and there was a submission that came in from a youth organisation, and so there is it'll be on one of the pages here. It was one of the submissions, and how we responded to that has been included in that. But yes, we definitely have engaged with youth on this.
But it seems our request was rejected in terms of having young people sitting in a governance capacity or an advisory capacity.
On the hearings panel?
On the hearings panel?
Yeah, no, that didn't
I just find it I just find it extraordinary, given all the stuff we're hearing about young people, particularly around things like climate change, and given how big an impact this will have, that we haven't heard, there were so few submissions. So I was just going to ask around the lack of submissions.
There was 92 submissions, yeah.
Right. So given that the UDS, the Greater Christchurch Urban Development Strategy, originally had over 3,500 submissions, how much weight do you think we should give to this strategy? Or how much confidence do you think we should have in terms of public engagement, given that we've had such a small number of submissions across that Greater Christchurch area?
That's a somewhat loaded question.
Well, no, but I mean, if we only hear from 2 people on something that's going to have an impact on 400, wouldn't you question kind of?
Well, look,
do we need to do more work? Do we need to get people more engaged?
You could draw that conclusion from the fact that we had 92 submissions and we were one of those 92. So, I mean, that's something to consider in making your decision, yes.
If we felt that there should be more engagement on this, what's our option available to us?
Well, this process obviously is drawn to a conclusion, but we will have to review the strategy. So there'll be future processes like this that we will have to engage. I mean, this was publicly notified. I mean, so people had the opportunity to submit. Yes, only 92 did, but no one was excluded from that process.
Okay. I just wanted to check on the. My understanding that there's an MOU. Has the MOU around the social and affordable housing gone to the Greater Christchurch Partnership, or is it going soon? And do we have we made requirements for resourcing to be committed by the partner councils when they've signed up to this agreement?
So the document has an action to develop an action plan on social and affordable housing, and we're working through the budgeting process for this coming financial year about resourcing that at the moment. So yeah, that's the action. I'm not aware of a MOU.
No, I'm not aware of an MOU, sorry.
Yeah, it's around an action plan.
On page 42, it says an MOU with Greater Christchurch Partnership in the Network, July 2019. So, I mean, I'm just like, I mean, given those of us who know the UDS and knew that housing, social housing and geographic dispersal of social housing was a priority, one of the top 20 priorities, I think we just kind of want to understand how that's actually going to be done rather than just ignored like last time.
Oh, sorry, yeah, I've found the page you're referring to. So this is page 243 in your agenda.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one of the actions in the action plan is to develop a MOU. So that hasn't been developed yet, but that is an action to develop.
Right. So we've got resource to do it as a council. I mean, we're going to do it. We've got resource.
Yes.
Yep.
The other councils have committed to resource.
We're going through that budgeting process at the moment, but yes, we are committed.
They've signed up to this,
Yep,
so
yep.
yes.
Okay. Just the final kind of bigger question I just wanted to kind of understand is specifically around the option and I guess the UDS trend. So basically we're told that this is sort of like the hybrid option. So I'm just trying to understand from the submissions, you know, when we had the UDS last time, and again we had a lot more submissions, but it was clear that people wanted consolidation, they didn't want urban sprawl, and so they had a very clear option that people had identified in terms of the consultation. I'm sort of struggling from reading through this to kind of see what is the option that people wanted in terms of settlement patterns for our Greater Christchurch area. Is out of those three that are sort of listed, is there a one that in terms of the submissions that they were overwhelmingly or clearly had a majority in support of, or can you tell us what the preferences were from the submitters? Because I think I've just read that they didn't support what was proposed, but I don't actually know what they supported.
So from my memory, we had very few submissions that actually said which of those options they preferred. It was really about, a lot of submissions were really whether they agreed with the proposal, which was based around the hybrid option or not, and we got a pretty mixed response to that. There were some for it and some against it. Yeah, there weren't many that offered alternatives in terms of the different options. A lot of people offered additional land that could be included for urban development, but that was really where the submissions went.
Okay, so we don't know if people wanted more sort of urban sprawl and or consolidation from this.
There was a mixed response. So there were some people that definitely wanted more consolidation. There were some people, and they were largely the landowners of the, you know, who owned the land that on the outside of the boundary that wanted urban development. They wanted their land included, which is urban. So yeah, there was a mixed response.
Okay. And sorry, finally, just a process question. In the report, there's reference to minutes being issued around potential for conflicts of interest and disclosure. Given the sort of sensitivity around those sorts of issues, are you able just to tell us what that was about and, you know, how that's been managed?
So are you able to refer to...
on page...
Answer that if you like, because it was about me.
17, it just says 45. The first minute issued on 8th of February 2019 discuss potential conflicts of interest and disclosure related to those with provision for any party to raise issues. And there's no, you know, some of our council companies that we own have made submissions. You know, I don't know what those conflict issues were, but it would be good just so we can be aware of that, if someone could just explain.
It was about me. There had been legal advice sought to see whether a panel member would be appropriate, whether there be a conflict for me as a Christchurch City Councillor when the Christchurch City Council itself had made a submission. That was what it was.
Thank you.
No, they didn't.
Okay. Thank you. Vicky.
I have 3 questions, if I may. Given that this goes forward 30 years or at least 10 years in the what's currently proposed, what's the impact on climate change of these changes?
Good question.
Yeah.
Well, I'm assuming they addressed it.
Yeah, I mean, this as I said before, the areas that have been identified for release for future urban development areas are within the UDS.
No, that's not the question.
Yeah.
Did the panel address and elaborate on the impact of this on climate change, given that in 30 years we need to be basically at net carbon neutral? And we're still looking at a housing density which the Christchurch City Council has said is way too low. And we're looking at massive increases in Selwyn and Waimak, which require major transport into their place of work, usually.
So my understanding is that was something that was considered by the panel, but it would be fair to say we would have wanted more movement in that space.
So where's our information on it? I mean, how do we make a call on it when we've just passed climate emergencies and all sorts of things and they haven't even told us?
So we've identified that the impact on climate change is an issue. I think the other thing to bear in mind is if we didn't agree to this, they could go. They could do a future development strategy by themselves and would have even more growth. They wouldn't be apportioning growth back to Christchurch City in the long term, and so there would be even more development in those areas, even more traffic coming back and forth, more emissions. So yes, this is a compromise. It's not ideal in terms of being.
Well, we've heard that the panel did take it, that it was taken into account.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It should be in our report.
Yes.
I think it should be in our report.
We've got targets.
We've just set it as our overarching objective. Can I ask a different question? Social affordable housing, which was our objection all the way through, and that I think in this scheme, Waimakariri and Selwyn grow dramatically faster as a percentage rate of growth than Christchurch City. But currently, I think one of them has about 100 social housing units that the council's involved in, and one of them, I think, has 4. So their ability to house their own people at whatever stage of their life when they may need social housing is severely curtailed. All we're saying is that we will work together. We're already going to have adopted this if this goes through. What leverage will we have if we adopt this and then agree that we do a joint thing on social and community housing? I'm assuming they will be able to say, go away, we're not interested, we like our exclusionary zonings, which are the highest in the country, both of them, number 1 and 2 in the country.
So we raised that issue in our submission. So that was one of the matters that we raised, because that was something that this council was concerned about.
Yeah, very.
We have discussed that at an officer level. It was considered at the hearings panel. We have not been able to. The action that you see in the future development strategy is where we were able to get to in terms of leverage. The agreement to write a strategy, but where we've got no leverage whatsoever. So they could just say, well, you're welcome to have as many social houses as you want, but we don't want them in our neighbourhoods. They are able to make their own decisions as we are able to make our own. Yeah. Right, and just in terms of transport demand, where we see the impacts of the Northern Motorway and Southern Motorway, so what assurance have we got that in 5, 10, 15 years' time that the Waimakariri and Selwyn district, through whatever mechanism, gives way more representation to the rural areas than the urban area, as all mechanisms in Canterbury do? What mechanism have we got for ensuring that they don't come back and say, hey, we need way more motorways and way more private transport links into the city because we all work there?
Well, that is a matter by continuing to work within partnership with them that we will.
Oh, none.
we will have to keep working. I mean, they have agreed to work on the downstream effects. We're working together on a future public transport business case. So that it is about working together and trying to find a solution.
Am I right in thinking that we don't have any awareness of the impact on climate change of this, and obviously we know that's the loss of some versatile soils, that we have no guarantees that anything will be able to happen on social housing being spread throughout the region, and that we have no guarantees that there won't be transport demands on the ratepayers of Christchurch as a result of this. Is that a fair assessment?
We have commitment from them to work together on this. We don't yet have commitment for them to resolve these issues, but we have made our position very clear to them, and that we want these resolved and we want to work.
And they've agreed to work with us.
So that's as far as we've been able to get so far.
15 houses minimum. And how did that go?
Oh.
Not so well.
Oh, they've moved up to 12 and they're willing to look at it further.
Yes.
That's as far as we've got. That's a compromise we've got so far.
Thank you. Okay, so I've got Glenn and then Anne. Glenn.
Yes, thank you. Vicky's already partly asked this question, but just to, not that it needs backing up, it was Kay Saville-Smith who's presented in various fora, including to our own housing subcommittee 10th of September last year, over the TA numbers over, just looking up the actual PowerPoint. Yes, and just to confirm, obviously, that Selwyn and then Waimakariri have the highest number of what you would call, proportion of all titles with land covenant by TA 2017. So that slide is entitled Private Restrictions on Land Use. So kind of colloquially, gated communities. But so what's your sense over the openness to effectively change and do something about it? I mean, there's been that big greenfield sprawl post-quake, obviously, but, what is your sense?
So those covenants are put in place by developers, not by the councils. So councils are limited to some extent as to whether they can prevent those happening. They can write district plan provisions that are contrary to them to try and prevent those covenants going in place, but they are an agreement between the developer and the people who buy into those subdivisions. So their hands are somewhat tied, but yes, Selwyn and Waimak do have the highest, much higher than Christchurch.
Can I, just given that I've had experience of this over one of the developments in the
Is this a
ward,
question?
we found that out. Yes, it is.
Yep.
There was just a bit of context.
Okay.
So at which point do we intervene? It's now or later or at various points along the way, regional policy, etc. So I do take your point over, obviously, developers.
How do you mean intervene, Councillor? How do you mean intervene?
Well, to circumvent that. Or is that what this is about today? Or do you do it further?
We have limited powers to circumvent it. They legally, under legislation, can put covenants on their subdivision, and if willing buyers buy in a subdivision agreeing to those covenants, then that's between them and the landowner. We don't enforce them. We can't prevent them from doing it. It's
I'll pick it up in debate.
Right.
So all good.
Yeah.
All right. Yep, that's great. Anne.
Just wanting some clarification, and obviously there's an expectation that you guys can see into the future.
Absolutely. Crystal clear.
I'm sorry about that, that expectation on you. I'm just wondering, it says there will be opportunities to address the outstanding issues as part of future capacity assessments. How will that happen? And it's a wee bit similar to what Glenn was asking. How often can that happen, and what form does that take?
So yeah, we've got in the back of our space there's a whole list of actions, and there's timeframes around that we've agreed with our partners to work on. So some of those issues will be addressed through that, and through future reviews of the strategy every 3 or so years. Then we'll have the same discussions and the same debates with our partners and try and resolve those issues. We've also got national policy statements that the government are thinking of releasing later this year. One around highly productive land, so versatile soils, and one around a review of this national policy statement on urban development. So that will also provide some guidance from central government as to how some of these issues can be resolved as well. So.
Just one other question, if I may.
Yes,
just
please.
In terms of, I mean, this is a huge piece of work and
Yes.
it involves a huge amount of people and a lot of big decisions. When you're working together, when we're working together in partnership with other councils and things, are there sort of rules that you kind of get in place to sort of like code of conduct or how we will be together before you start this process in terms of managing the relationship?
There's, I guess, within the Greater Christchurch Partnership, the documentation that sits around the partnership itself, the terms of reference, there's guidance around that. So we do work together in a collaborative way, and we try to do that as best we can.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks for doing that.
All right, thank you. Dion.
Yeah, I just wanted to selfishly ask, I suppose, what's in it for the central city of Christchurch? Now, we've got a whole lot of aspirations, I suppose. So I just wanted, I've read the document, but I just wanted to spell out this approach versus the other approach. What is in it for us in the central city in terms of the aspirations we have around residents?
Yeah, so I mean, this. I suppose the benefit of this is that it will, over the long term, encourage more and more growth in Christchurch City, and that will include the central city. It's obviously a priority for us, and the partnership have said it's a priority for them as well. So yes, if we work together, we'll try and get more of that growth occurring within the central city, as opposed to working separately and them going on their own direction.
So from all the work that you've done on this, you believe working together versus working apart will actually have more benefit to the central city and the residential space long term?
As long as we work together collaboratively and are all clear on the outcome we're trying to achieve, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any further questions? All right, so Phil.
I'm happy to second this, and I'm presuming would like Sarah to...
So Sarah will move. Yep. Phil will second.
Can I ask one last question before you go to that?
Yep.
Can I just clarify, how many people on the panel?
There were 7. From what I remember. Yep.
Okay. And of the population area represented, Christchurch would be what, 80%?
Almost, yes.
How many did we have?
1.
1.
Thank you. So now, now let's move into debate. Sarah.
Thank you. In 2007, Christchurch City Council and partner councils passed the Urban Development Strategy. It had significant community engagement and did cover a broad range of aspirations for Greater Christchurch. One key thing that it did was to restrict growth by setting infrastructure boundaries that were then put into the Canterbury Regional Policy Statement. There was an option to carry on business as usual, with every small town in Waimakariri and Selwyn able to grow at will, but it was clear to everyone that restricting growth to the towns of Rolleston, Rangiora and Kaiapoi would be better both for the environment and transport planning and for everyone. It's important to note that while the Future Development Strategy has an impact on Christchurch, there are actually no planning changes within it for Christchurch, in spite of many submissions from developers asking for their pieces of land to be added. Developers also submitted asking for more land outside the infrastructure boundaries in Waimakariri and Selwyn, but were all declined by the panel. And let's be clear, this is a legally required future development strategy. It's not the urban development strategy and has a much more limited scope. It was a continual frustration during the process that social housing and climate change weren't specifically within scope, but they are covered by other documents and policies under development. This isn't the only document in charge of development in Greater Christchurch. Since the UDS was approved by this council, we have had a series of earthquakes that triggered enormous settlement pattern changes with increases in Christchurch residents moving into our neighbouring districts. Their growth trajectory was enormous, and had they been able to continue, they would have used up their available planned land so much sooner than expected, especially at the very low 10 households per hectare, and would have required more to be zoned. Being part of this process has allowed us to have influence, and that goes both ways. That's the nature of a partnership. It's also part of a very long chicken and egg process, and we'll be starting work with partner councils on a better capacity assessment tool to inform decision making to lead into the next round of decision making. We will also, I have no doubt, be asking for the consequential RPS change to include the new density requirement. It's fair to say that had the previous government not put in the Auckland-centric NPS on the urban development capacity, we would have not gone through this process now. But the new areas that the FDS allowed to be zoned by councils in the medium, then the long term, are still within the infrastructure boundaries signed off in the UDS by this council, and are at a higher density of 12 houses per hectare than originally planned. This document also requires developments to look at the downstream transport effects and mandates further work on a social and affordable housing strategy. Is it perfect for Christchurch City? Nope. Is it what Selwyn and Waimakariri were ideally after? No. But let's not the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Thank you. Glenn.
Thank you. Just further to what Sarah said, I remember the launch in 2007 to much fanfare involving Prime Minister Helen Clark at the time of the UDS. Obviously in 2011 and 10 we had those extraordinary events being the earthquakes. It had the effect of us agreeing to moving outside the red line, which some councillors at the time said was akin to swallowing a rat, which meant taking in new areas in the city. But that's what happened. It was a series of extraordinary events. But we see the effects of that in data supplied by people such as Kay Saville Smith, where in terms of proportion of all titles with land covenant, in 2017, Selwyn had 48%, Waimakariri 40%, and we were 16%. So those first two figures, especially with our partners, compared to Queenstown Lakes on 36% and Tauranga 35%. It shows you what we're up against. We've had a major intervention by way of the quakes, and we're going to need some major interventions to reverse that process if we are going to hope to deliver some measure of affordable housing. In our housing policy, we have links to the NPS and the RPS. This is a policy we all resolved on at the beginning of this term. One of the actions in the schedule is high priority over inclusionary zoning, and it's my view that we will need to turn to that once we get to the review of the regional policy statement. Yes, it's good, and I urge you to support our part in this and signing up today with our partners, but we can't just hope that affordable housing will happen. We actually need some tools to make sure. We've heard about developers. I mean, we're not going to get it unless we take action. So support this today, but looking forward to the cascading work that'll be a result of this.
Thank you. Mike.
Thank you. Is this the best outcome for the city? No, it's not. But it is in no way a bad outcome, and by not adopting this, it would create perverse outcomes for the city. We have been at the table with the ability to influence, and that is what we have done. Our neighbouring districts have moved away from their desired outcomes that they would have preferred, and that's what you do when you're at the table. You look at the bigger picture and you have a best for Greater Christchurch approach. We don't have the ability to force our neighbours to do anything, and if we'd walked away, then they could just go alone. More people would move to Selwyn and Waimakariri than what would have occurred if this was adopted. Urban sprawl would become worse, and the pressure placed on our transport infrastructure would mean it would not cope. I think one thing that this does highlight is the possible need for Greater Christchurch to become a unitary authority.
Any further debate on this?
Yes.
Anne.
Complex issues such as these require collaboration, and obviously you've worked really hard at getting that to happen. Collaboration, if you're getting a collaborative approach, requires trust, it requires respect, it requires time to build relationships, and it requires a capacity for managing diversity of views. And from what we've heard, there may be some, going forward, there may be opportunity for a more diverse voice to come into this discussion. But if we are to actually manage the big issues that we face, water is another one, we have to learn to work together. And as Mike has said, we have to make concessions, and we won't always get what we want. But I am encouraged to read that because of the work that you've done, we have had some of our concerns actually addressed, and thank you for that. This is going to be reviewed and assessed as we go forward. It's not set in stone. But we must keep that communication and relationship going so that we can sit around a table and get the best outcomes for all of us. So I'll be supporting this today. Thank you.
Thank you. Phil.
Thank you. And I'd like to start by thanking Sarah and her huge commitment and huge work involved, and also the staff, of course. This has been an enormous undertaking to get this to where it is today. And while I've got some reservations about it, I'm strongly supporting the recommendations. I think it's clear in what we're required to do under the National Policy Statement that we have to work towards collaborating and cooperating with the other local authorities. And and speakers have earlier referred to the fact this is not far from always being easy. And I guess it's clear too, though, that if we don't succeed with this today, each local authority will then develop their own targets separately, and we would have to do the same. And I think, while I've got reservations about it, and most councillors have, I see that, but that we do know that any new housing development will be expected to achieve a density of at least 12 households per hectare, and clearly that's out of kilter still with the city. We'll be doing 15, but that is an advance and improvement on trying to reduce urban sprawl. But I think too, when we look at Map A in this, and on the Greater Christchurch Partnership Committee, we looked at this often following the work of the hearings panel. The changes on that really are the same. They're within the original urban development strategy limits. Yes, set in 2007. So in fact, there's no additional land should be available, is my understanding, further than the UDS boundaries. There's been a lot of concern, of course, about the downstream effects of all the infrastructure. But again, I would see that any future developments are going to have to fit existing policies. For example, and greenfield policies are going to apply. There's been reference to the Canterbury Regional Policy Statement, and which is due for review soon, as well as the work that is beginning already on the capacity assessment. I think it's starting next year. So, and I guess in relation to the concern we have had about encroachment on versatile soils, it's clear in the report the government are putting out a government national policy statement on versatile soils. It'd be my expectation that in fact that will address the concerns which some of us have had. So, as I've indicated, we could adopt our own future development strategy because that would be required, or we can continue to choose to work with our partners to address what are clearly outstanding issues. And we will have some input working this way with the other local councils with their strategies. The further work is called essential actions, and I see that as being really hugely important. And there's no doubt around social and affordable housing, we will be asking our neighbours to actually take responsibility too for their people who don't have adequate housing. And the same with evaluating the appropriateness for minimum housing density. That's what we'll be wanting them to do, so that those other areas are concerning. So yes, currently it has very big challenges, there's no question of that, but I think overall we as a council are far better to accept the recommendations.
Thank you. David.
Thank you. Look, firstly, can I acknowledge the huge amount of work that has gone in, not only through our authority but our neighbours as well. It has consumed a large amount of people's times over a quite significant period. I think it says it all for me in the executive summary, where we say that the National Policy Statement requires all local authorities within a high-growth urban area to produce a future development strategy demonstrating that there will be sufficient feasible development capacity in the medium and long term. I think both councillors Templeton and Davison summed it up. Is it good for Christchurch? Possibly not. Is it good for Selwyn? Same thing, and Waimakariri. I believe we've invested a huge amount of time and money in this project. In the end, we have to compromise in some areas, and I think our neighbours have compromised, we have compromised, and we need to go forward with a plan, and I believe this is probably as good as it's going to get, but there is scope to work on it going forward. So I'm happy to support the motion that we have here before us today.
Thank you. Dion.
I'll be quick. I just want to say that I don't like it, and I don't like it from, I know what it says, but when I look at the data, I don't get a sense of confidence that it's good for my objectives as the councillor for Christchurch Central. And that's, the words say it's fine. The data to me doesn't paint that same story, and I'm just going to put that out there. And from that point of view, I just don't, I don't like it. Do I like the alternative? I think I like the alternative worse. So this makes it quite difficult. And when I'm thinking of this, I have to go a little bit above being the councillor for Christchurch Central and look at being the councillor for Christchurch, or a councillor for Christchurch, and actually wanting the best for the region. And we're facing a position at the moment in our region where the wider economy is changing, and we need to work together to make it work. Because if we don't make it work, we're not going to have people wanting to live here, we're not going to have future development. So from that point of view, I just, I'm a little bit worried about this because I don't like it, but I'm also more concerned about what the actual effect would be if we don't work together. So from that point of view, I will have to support it, but I think we've got some work to do, and we need to get these other mayors and councillors around the table from the regions.
Thank you. Yanni.
Yeah, on the weekend, Local Government New Zealand just released their book called Reinvigorating Local Democracy, the case for localising power and decision making to councils and communities. And what's really interesting about that is that this process is held up as the poster child of why we need to do things differently. In fact, to quote from the document, the MPS is extremely prescriptive and complex to implement and based on a flawed economic model. Christchurch City and its two neighbouring councils have so far spent approximately $1.2 million on meeting the policy's requirements, and overall most councils using it have found the tool to be unfit for the purpose in which it was intended. We actually have a problem with what we've been asked to do, in that it doesn't give any certainty in any real sense of the detail. It enables all these other processes to occur at some future stage that is where some of the key decisions will be made without any clear visibility back to our community. But my starting point on this is the complete lack of engagement with the greater Christchurch people. This is a strategy that has huge implications for the future of our region. Our children and our young people, I think, absolutely deserve to have their voices be heard and be part of the governance around this. There's been very interesting research come out recently around young people and children feeling like they don't have a voice around these important decisions about their future. And I have to say, when I look at only less than 100 submissions and hardly any from young people and children for something that's going to have a huge impact on their future well-being, I cannot endorse this today. I also want to address the issue of the impact of climate change and of the central city. This is going to kill our central city even more than what it's currently experiencing by enabling greater growth. For people like me who represent areas like Phillipstown and have seen directly the impact of the jobs and the factories closing in Phillipstown and moving out to Rolleston, what that does to people in those communities is massive. They can no longer walk or bike to work. They're lucky if they can take a bus to work, and they have huge increased transport costs as a result, alongside a very unsustainable approach to land use. So I don't support this. I think there needs to be much more engagement with the people of our region and of our city. I think if you look back to what happened with the UDS, where things like affordable and social housing were seen as priority actions and were never delivered on, this is just doing something completely similar. It sounds good at the time, and it's something that's said to get people to endorse it and embrace it, but when you go back and look at what actually happened, what we've seen is basically the UDS enabled funding for motorways to go from the surrounding districts into our city that we paid a huge cost and our communities pay a big price for. So I can't support this. My lack of support for this, though, is please don't take that as a reflection on our staff and on our councillor who's been on the hearing panel. The process is what I think is the problem with this, and the scope of the ability for the decisions that we're making. I know that staff have worked incredibly hard to put forward the concerns that we've raised all the way through this process, and I know that our councillor on the hearing panel has done her best to represent the things and the issues that we have had. But for me, this doesn't go far enough in terms of the objectives that we would want. It doesn't have a community mandate. We shouldn't agree to it today. It needs a lot more work.
So I would probably start by referring us to the answers to the questions I asked at the very beginning, because whilst this may not be perfect, and whilst there may be things in it that we don't like, the alternative, which is not adopting this, is far less perfect, and in my view brings about a situation that we like even less. It's probably echoing the sort of comments that that Dion made a few minutes ago. But there are some big issues here, and there are some big issues, the answers to which long-term will have some long-term outcomes. Issues around transport and development and urban growth and urban spread and so on. But we've got a legal requirement to do this. And our neighbouring councils have also got a legal requirement to do this. If we go it alone, and therefore they go it alone, or possibly even worse, in partnership without us at the table, the outcomes for Christchurch will be worse than the outcomes that, whilst they may not be perfect, we've got in front of us today by working in partnership, which at least has given us some influence over the outcomes in those neighbouring districts. So we have been better to collaborate, in my view, than we ever would have been to go alone. I also think it's worth noting that a vibrant community is always going to need a vibrant economy, and a vibrant city is always going to need a vibrant central city, and our central city is the central city not only for Christchurch, but for Greater Christchurch. So even when residents are living across our own boundaries, beyond our own boundaries, many of those people are using our central city, and some would say, oh, they're using our stadium and using our art gallery and using our other facilities. But actually, they're also contributing to our economy, which makes our central city a whole lot more viable. So to not adopt would send a very negative message. And again, we heard this in answers to questions about our view of the Greater Christchurch Partnership. Just to comment on the concept of localism, yes, I take the comments which have been made, but if we take the view that not to adopt this could lead to the breakdown of the Greater Christchurch Partnership, there is another argument that goes something along the lines of the breakdown of the Christchurch Partnership increases the likelihood of the Greater Christchurch Unitary Authority, which by its very nature takes democracy further from the people rather than closer to it, and therefore erodes localism rather than contributing to that. So with some reluctance, because this isn't perfect, I am going to vote in favour of this today. But like any partnership, like any relationship, perfection is very hard to achieve. And it's clear from the answers to the various questions that were put that there is a strong element of compromise here, but there's also a strong element of working in partnership so that we can get to a better position long term. So I'd like to end just by thanking our representatives on the Greater Christchurch Partnership, thanking Sarah for her role on the hearings panel, and also to make the point that we provided guidance to our representatives on the Greater Christchurch Partnership as a result of various briefings that we had and education that we had around how this was progressing. The guidance that we provided was that they should bring this back to this table for a decision. I doubt we would have provided that guidance unless we were expecting to take at least a half positive view of this when it came here. So I'm indicating that I'll vote in favour of this today, and I would hope that others would do the same. Sarah, did you want to make some comments to close the debate?
Yes, but I'll cut them in half for Jamie.
I have another meeting. I apologise during our break.
Listen, Yanni's right. The reality is that we would not have chosen to go through this process in this way. And we did ask, the Greater Christchurch Partnership did ask if we could not go through the process, and we were told that we had to. We have had an influence on other councils' planning through this process, and the reality is that we would be incredibly grumpy if other councils came in and told us what to do. But that's exactly what we're trying to do. If we throw the baby out with the bathwater, the outcomes will be worse for us. Let's focus on the big picture and get better outcomes.
Thank you. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Okay, so if we can have the votes against recorded. So that's Yanni, Vicky, just those two. All right, thank you. So that's carried. So that's...